Most people walk into a job interview thinking it's a test. Study the company, prepare your answers, hit the right keywords, demonstrate your skills clearly enough and you pass. But here's what's strange. Candidates who do all of that, who answer every question well, who have the right experience, who say exactly what they're supposed to say, still get rejected, regularly. And they leave the building with no real idea why. Meanwhile, someone else gets the offer, someone who wasn't necessarily more qualified, but who walked out of the room leaving a completely different impression. The uncomfortable truth is that interviews are not purely a skills assessment. They never really were. And understanding what's actually happening in that room changes how you should prepare, how you should speak, and what you should prioritize. There's a well-known dynamic in interviewing that makes most candidates uncomfortable when they hear it. Interviewers form strong impressions very early in a conversation, not necessarily in the first 30 seconds. That's an oversimplification. But well before the structured questions are over, many interviewers have already developed a leaning. The rest of the interview often becomes, unconsciously, a process of confirming that first impression rather than genuinely testing it. This is not a flaw unique to bad interviewers. It's a documented pattern in how humans process social information. We read tone, confidence, clarity, and presence quickly, and then we anchor to that read. What this means practically is that how you open the conversation matters enormously. The first answer you give, the way you handle the initial small talk, the energy you carry into the first 2 minutes, these set a frame that everything else gets filtered through. A strong candidate who starts hesitantly often has to work twice as hard to recover. An average candidate who opens with clarity and presence often benefits from that halo through the rest of the conversation. The interview doesn't start when the formal questions begin. It starts the moment you're in front of anyone connected to the process. At some point in most hiring processes, someone will say the words culture fit. It's one of the most used and least defined phrases in recruiting. And because it's vague, it does something specific. It gives interviewers permission to make gut feel decisions without having to articulate the reasoning clearly. Sometimes culture fit is legitimate. It refers to things like communication style, pace, how directly people give feedback, or how much autonomy the role requires. Those are real compatibility factors. But sometimes culture fit is a post hoc explanation for a decision that was actually made on much more surface-level impressions. Likability, familiarity, how comfortable the interviewer felt in the room. The reason this matters for candidates is simple. If you're preparing only for the skills-based questions, the experience walkthrough, the technical problems, the competency examples, you may be winning on the part that gets evaluated on paper while losing on the part that actually decides the offer. Interviewers are not just asking themselves, can this person do the job? They're also asking, do I want to work with this person? Will they fit into the dynamic we already have? Will they be easy or difficult to manage? These questions are rarely asked out loud, but they're almost always being answered. Behavioral questions. Tell me about a time you handled conflict. Describe a situation where you failed. Give me an example of working under pressure. Are now standard in most professional interviews. Most candidates treat them as memory tests. Find the right story, tell it clearly, match it to the question. That's the task. But what interviewers are actually doing with these questions is more specific. They're listening for three things underneath the story itself. First, self-awareness. Does this person understand why things went the way they did, including their own role in any difficulty? Someone who tells a failure story without any genuine reflection on what they could have done differently is flagging something. Either they don't learn from experience, or they're not willing to be honest in an interview setting. Neither is reassuring. Second, judgment. Not just what decision was made, but how the person thinks about decisions. What they noticed, what they weighed, what they were trying to protect or achieve. Interviewers who are good at this aren't listening to the outcome of your story. They're listening to the reasoning inside it. Third, pattern. One story is a data point, but across a full interview, most experienced interviewers are looking for consistency. Whether the same qualities show up across different examples, or whether the candidate seems to be performing a version of themselves that doesn't quite hold together. The candidates who do well in behavioral interviews aren't necessarily the ones with the most dramatic stories. They are the ones who can talk about real situations with honesty, specificity, and a clear sense of what they actually think. Here is one of the more uncomfortable realities of the interview process. Confidence and competence are not the same thing, but in interview conditions, they are frequently mistaken for each other. A candidate who speaks with certainty, who doesn't overqualify every statement, who answers questions directly and moves forward without visible hesitation. That person reads as capable, even when the content of what they are saying is only average. A candidate who is genuinely expert but hedges constantly, who answers with excessive nuance, who qualifies everything they say because they know how complex the real answer actually is. That person can read as uncertain, even when they know more than anyone else in the room. This isn't about performing false confidence or pretending to know things you don't. It's about understanding that delivery shapes interpretation, and that most interviewers are not equipped to separate presentation quality from actual capability. The practical adjustment is not to become someone else. It's to practice speaking about your experience with more directness. State what you did, state what happened, state what you do again or differently. Then stop. Don't trail off into unnecessary caveats that undermine your own credibility. Most candidates treat the end of the interview, when the interviewer asks if they have any questions, as a formality. It isn't. The questions a candidate asks reveal how they think, what they are paying attention to, and whether they've actually engaged with the role as a real situation rather than a target to hit. Interviewers notice this. Not always consciously, but the quality of a candidate's questions leaves an impression. Weak questions are easy to identify. They are generic. They could apply to any company in any industry. They signal that the candidate hasn't thought carefully about what the role actually involves. Asking about perks, remote policy, or vacation time in a first interview rarely helps, even if those things are legitimate concerns. Strong questions are specific. They reference something real about the team, the challenge, or the context. They show that the candidate has thought about what success in this role actually looks like, and that they're evaluating the opportunity seriously, not just hoping to be picked. There's also a subtler dimension. Candidates who ask good questions signal that they are the kind of employee who thinks before acting, who looks for context, and who approaches situations with genuine curiosity. That's a professional quality many interviewers are trying to assess, and the question round is often where it shows up most clearly. After most interviews, the feedback that gets shared between hiring managers is rarely a detailed breakdown of every answer. It's a feeling, a shorthand, a sentence or two. She was really sharp and confident. He knew his stuff but felt a bit hard to read. She asked great questions. Something felt off, I'm not sure what. That compression is important to understand because it means the impression you leave is more than the sum of your individual answers. It's the overall signal, clear or muddled, energized or flat, genuine or rehearsed, that the interviewer carries out of the room. Candidates who leave strong impressions usually have one thing in common. They show up as a real person with actual opinions about their work, not as someone executing a performance. They have a clear sense of what they're good at and why it matters. They engage with the interview as a conversation rather than a test, and they make the interviewer feel that speaking with them was worthwhile, which is not nothing when you've spent a full day in back-to-back hiring conversations. Here's the real shift this video is trying to make. Interviews are not just competence tests with a social wrapper around them. They are social evaluations that happen to include some competence questions. That distinction changes everything about how you should prepare. Your experience matters. Your examples matter. Your preparation matters. But the candidates who consistently convert interviews into offers usually understand something extra. That they're not just being assessed on what they know, they're being assessed on how they think, how they communicate, how self-aware they are, and whether the interviewer leaves the room feeling good about their recommendation. None of that means you should become someone you're not, or learn to perform a version of confidence you don't feel. It means understanding the full game, so you're not losing on dimensions you never knew were being evaluated. The goal isn't to trick interviewers. It's to stop accidentally undermining yourself and to walk into the room knowing what's actually being decided.